Hello and welcome back. In the previous video, we discussed the ways that simplicity and detail are used in data visualization and how this relates to data communication as a rhetorical act. To provide a bit more context, we're going to talk a little bit about the history as well as the broader environment in data visualization, and that might give some additional context about why we're talking about simplicity in data. So as you may be aware, data visualization as a practice has really exploded in the past several decades, and this has been made possible by the widespread adoption of computers as well as increased data collection on many topics. So that's not to say there were not older examples. So going back as far as the 17th century, we've got William Playfair, and then in the 19th century, I suppose actually I should rephrase, I think William Playfair is in fact the 18th century, and John Snow and Menard in the 19th century, presenting data on British commerce, epidemiology, and the Napoleonic Wars respectively. But in much more recent decades, we've had a real explosion of data visualization experts, thought leaders, gurus, you name it. So individuals like Edward Tufte, Cole Nussbaum-Knaflic, and Alberto Cairo, to name a few, but by no means is this an exhaustive list. So many of these experts really promote this idea that data visualizations should be very clear and simple to really draw your attention to the point you're trying to make and minimize that visual load. So for example, Edward Tufte writing in 2001, recommends minimizing what he terms the data ink ratio. In this case, it's more pixels, but really cutting down on any part of a visualization that does not actively convey information. So to Tufte, this side on the right, these very minimal line charts, they are bar charts, but just lines conveying bar charts, would be preferable to the more traditional bar chart. I'm not sure that I'm convinced personally, but it is certainly his point of view to, again, minimize that extra visual load, that extra brain power used to absorb and kind of understand each point in the chart. Similarly, Cole Nussbaum-Knaflic, writing in 2015 Storytelling with Data, recommends really highlighting key data points. They write, for example, if you were creating a visualization, let's say in Excel, to share your data, your whatever data you've collected with your colleagues, they recommend really graying everything out in the chart and then deciding, okay, what are the data points we want of interest to sort of call into focus, call into darker, bolder tones. So that way we are kind of being the active decision maker in making our visualizations to present, again, these simple messages to our users so they know exactly where to look and they're not sort of bombarded. Again, it really puts the user in the driver's seat. And so these researchers and designers point to Gestalt psychology, a school of thought that really talks about how the mind interprets an image as sort of a whole rather than its individual components. And they also will make frequent reference to visual load to recommend really cleaner, more minimal designs of data visualization. That said, that's not to say that these points of view are uncontroversial. So Bateman and a group writing in 2010, they actually tested in a study with study participants this sort of Tufte style minimal chart versus a chart that they had from a newspaper. And so this was of looking at campaign spending. As we can see, it steadily goes up, but that's not really the point here. They showed these to different groups of individuals and essentially tested, these are examples, I think they had additional ones in the paper, but they essentially tested them for comprehension as well as recall. And it turned out that the readers of both charts were able to do more or less equally in terms of comprehension, but there was some sign that the more illustrated chart had better recall, or the illustrated chart group had better recall. So it may be the case that there may be times when having a higher design level, not as clear from that kind of minimalist standpoint, may be more effective at presenting information. Additionally, there's a growing body of critical data researchers who really are looking at these claims, such as the call for simplicity and minimalism in charts, and saying that these are actually go beyond merely how best to present information, are really a rhetorical act. So earlier in the previous video, we mentioned Aristotle, who discusses rhetoric, and that these minimal charts are really trying to appeal to our sense of authority and our sense of credibility. So really that idea of the appeal to ethos or authority, as well as trying to appear as logical as possible. So again, that appeal to logos, going back to those terms. And similarly, it may be worth noting that there can often be a contextual component for how complex or simple we want to be in presenting our visuals. So for example, if we are presenting to library stakeholders, we might want to be really granular about the level of specificity of the data we're collecting. So be that expenses or reader times or resource use, we might want to provide them with a higher level of detail. Really sort of smoothing that out and providing a very low level might not be as transparent to that group. Conversely, if we're providing information for general library patrons, we might provide a little bit more zoomed out of a picture since they might not be as interested or as prepared to sort of interpret the very fine-grained point of view. So that's all to say that when we talk about how we're going to present our visualizations and how we're going to design our visualizations, we need to remember that this is a rhetorical act and that there is going to be some degree of presenting information to support an argument. So we want to also consider that the ethical considerations of these rhetorical acts are going to be more complex than merely avoiding deception, since the clarity and honesty of our presentation will be considerations. So it's not to say we're being dishonest, to go back to that previous example, to the casual patron when we don't dive as in depth in our information. We're not trying to trick anybody in that case, but it may be the case that a simpler viewpoint may be more useful for communicating, more effective to communicate with that group. Conversely, it may be considered less useful for the stakeholders, for the library decision makers, if we don't provide the fine-grained detail. So that's all to say. Visualizing data is going to include a lot of decisions, and the decisions we make are shaped by ethical and rhetorical concerns, and that goes beyond just the idea of being clear in what is the end point of our message.